All right, so today we're going deep on P. Diddy, the man, the myth, the mogul, Sean Combs, right?
That's right.
And we've got an interesting mix of sources today. One of them is actually from a French YouTube channel called The Observer.
Yeah, that's a fascinating one.
So it'll give us kind of a unique perspective on Diddy's impact, right?
Exactly. It's a very different lens.
Yeah. We're going to go beyond the music here.
Absolutely.
Talk about some business moves, legal battles, even a little social activism.
A little bit of everything.
Yeah, a little bit of everything.
It's quite the story. And what's interesting about that, that French take on him, is how they view Diddy through, I don't know, maybe a lens we miss here in the U.S.
Oh, interesting.
They connect his ambition and sometimes, I guess, ruthless business tactics to a particularly American drive for success.
Okay.
It's very interesting.
So they're looking at it through that very specific lens.
Yeah, it's interesting. They have this critical take on what they see as a willingness to achieve success, even at the expense of ethical concerns. So it makes you examine the whole story differently.
Yeah. No, that's fascinating. So let's go back to the early 90s. Diddy's at Uptown Records, making waves.
Yeah.
And then, bam, he's fired.
He gets fired.
What happened there?
Yeah, it seems like their visions were clashing, Diddy's in Uptowns.
Okay.
He wanted more creative control. He wanted ownership.
Right.
And that ultimately led him to just take a huge leap, founding Bad Boy Records in 1993.
What a power move.
It really was.
And it paid off, right? I mean, he signed Biggie, he signed Faith Evans.
Oh, yeah.
Craig Mack. I mean, Bad Boy became like the sound of the 90s for hip-hop.
It did. I mean, it was also a time when these independent labels, like Bad Boy, they were disrupting the industry, right? They were challenging these major labels. They were giving artists, especially hip-hop artists, more control over their music, their careers, and Diddy was at the forefront of that movement.
Now, this early success, it wasn't without controversy. We've got sources here mentioning some issues with artist contracts, some pretty serious accusations about how Diddy was handling the financial side of things.
That's right. Back then, contracts in the music industry were notoriously complex.
Right.
You had all these clauses about royalties, publishing rights, recording costs.
Yeah.
Artists, especially younger ones, could easily get caught up in agreements that weren't really in their best interest.
So are we saying that Diddy was taking advantage of these young artists?
Well, some sources definitely point to that. There are disputes with artists like Mace, the Locks, who claimed they were locked into contracts that didn't give them fair compensation or creative freedom.
Right.
Now, these kinds of issues, they were sadly very common in the industry.
Sure.
But it does raise questions about Diddy's approach and whether he was more focused on profit than artist development,
Wow. It makes me think about the whole mentor-protege dynamic in the music business.
Yeah.
And how power can really be misused.
Absolutely. And that theme of power dynamics will definitely come up again and again as we get deeper into Diddy's story.
Okay, so let's shift gears a little bit. Let's talk about the East Coast, West Coast rivalry.
Yeah.
It was like hip-hop's civil war. And Diddy with Bad Boy, right in the middle of it all.
Oh, yeah, he was front and center. And it wasn't just a musical rivalry either. It was a cultural clash that reflected these deeper tensions in society.
Interesting.
You had the East Coast with this harder, more streetwise sound.
Right.
And then the West Coast, more laid-back, funk-influenced.
Sure, and the media.
And of course, the media just blew it all up.
Oh, of course.
Fueling the fire, creating this dangerous us versus them mentality.
It's crazy to think that something as positive as music could become so divisive.
Mm.
And then, of course, the tragic deaths of Tupac in 96 and Biggie in 97. I mean, Diddy was deeply affected by Biggie's death.
Yeah.
Even though he wasn't directly involved in the violence.
Right. It's important, I think, to not speculate on those events. But it's impossible to ignore the atmosphere. That permeated the music scene at that time. It was a dark chapter for hip-hop.
Yeah. And it seems like Diddy's own troubles with the law, they were just beginning.
They were, and this is where we start to see a pattern emerging. From the 1999 nightclub shooting, where he was ultimately acquitted, to artist disputes, allegations of assault, Diddy's name just kept popping up. In these legal battles, this was a recurring theme throughout his career, which really adds to the complexity of his image.
Let's break down those legal issues a little bit. What were some of the specifics with those artist disputes, and how did those cases play out?
Well, take the case of the Locks, for example. A very talented trio who felt that their contract with Bad Boy was too restrictive. They wanted to explore different creative directions.
Right.
But they claimed that Diddy wouldn't release them from their agreement. It took a public campaign. and even the intervention of other industry heavyweights to finally get them out of that deal.
It makes you wonder how many other artists felt trapped or stifled under Diddy's leadership. Did his ambition, his drive for success, come at the cost of his artist's well-being?
It's a tough question to answer definitively, but these cases definitely raise concerns about the ethics of his business practices and whether he was truly looking out for the best interests of his talent.
Right. So we've got this backdrop of legal issues, but at the same time, Diddy is building an empire that went way beyond music. He had his clothing line, Sean John, his vodka brand, Ciroc. He was diversifying like crazy.
He was a master of branding and marketing, constantly reinventing himself, expanding his reach. And Ciroc in particular was a brilliant move. He took a relatively unknown vodka brand, and through strategic partnerships and savvy marketing, he turned it into a global phenomenon.
Yeah, the deal with Diageo, the spirits giant, that was the game changer.
It was.
It showed that Diddy wasn't just a music mogul, but he was a serious player in the business world.
Exactly. And this entrepreneurial spirit, this drive to dominate, it was something that fueled his success, but some would argue led him down a path of questionable choices.
So we're starting to see these dualities emerge in Diddy's character. The brilliant businessman, the charismatic leader, but also the ruthless negotiator, the man who always seems to be surrounded by controversy.
That's what makes his story so fascinating. It's not black and white, it's full of shades of gray. And as we dig deeper, we'll see these contradictions play out in even more dramatic ways.
Yeah, I'm fascinated to see where this goes.
Me too.
Okay.
Let's keep going.
Let's do it.
And those shades of gray, they really come through in that French analysis from The Observer. They highlight a perspective that's, less forgiving than what you might typically find in the U.S. coverage of Diddy.
Oh, that's interesting. So what are they saying that's so different?
Well, they delve into how Diddy's drive for success, which of course is often lauded in American culture, can sometimes cross the line into exploitation. They point to his legal entanglements, his reputation for these tough negotiations, and even his extravagant lifestyle as examples of what they call a win-at-all-costs mentality that can sometimes leave others behind.
That's a pretty harsh critique, but I can see how, from an outsider's perspective, those aspects of Diddy's story might stand out, especially in a culture that maybe doesn't romanticize the relentless pursuit of wealth in the same way we sometimes do here.
Exactly. The Observer argues that Diddy embodies both the allure and the dark side of the American dream. He's achieved incredible wealth and influence, but often at the expense of others, whether it's artists feeling cheated or business partners feeling squeezed out.
Yeah, it's a good reminder that success, especially in an industry as cutthroat as music, it isn't always a straightforward narrative. There are often these hidden costs, ethical compromises, power imbalances that don't always make it into the headlines.
Right, and as we move into the 2000s, those complexities only seem to intensify. Diddy's facing more legal challenges. There's the incident with the UCLA football coach in 2015. It all creates this sense of a man who's pushing boundaries, but maybe not always in the right direction.
Yeah, that UCLA incident was wild. I remember that making headlines everywhere. It seemed like Diddy always had this fiery personality, but did it cross a line there?
Well, the details of that case are still pretty murky, and opinions are definitely divided.
Yeah.
But it does raise questions about anger management, privilege, and the blurred lines between tough love and abuse.
Interesting. So we've got all these legal battles playing out, but at the same time, Diddy is still expanding his empire. He launches Revolt TV, a music and entertainment network aimed at younger audiences. He's making moves in the tech world, investing in startups. It's like he's constantly trying to stay ahead of the curve.
He's a master of reinvention. It's as if he's always looking for that next big thing, the next opportunity to disrupt the status quo. And that restlessness, that ambition, it's part of what makes him so compelling.
But it also seems like he's trying to control his narrative, too, to shape how he's perceived by the public. He goes from Puff Daddy, the flashy party guy, to p.ddy, the more serious businessman and philanthropist. Is it genuine growth or just a calculated PR move?
That's a great question. And it's one that continues to be debated.
Yeah.
Some see it as a genuine attempt at personal evolution, a desire to shed a persona that no longer fits.
Wow.
Others view it as a way to distance himself from past controversies and to rebrand himself for a new generation.
Okay. But let's talk about the activism. We can't ignore Diddy's Vote or Die campaign, which encouraged young people to get involved in the political process. That was a big deal, especially in the early 2000s when voter apathy among young people was a huge concern.
Absolutely. And he's been vocal about other social issues as well, speaking out against police brutality, supporting Black Lives Matter, advocating for criminal justice reform. Those are important contributions that can't be dismissed.
So how do we reconcile this side of Diddy, the activist, the philanthropist, with the other side, the one that's entangled in these legal battles and accusations of unethical behavior? It seems like there's this constant tension between his actions and his image.
That tension, that duality,
Hmm.
is really at the heart of Diddy's story. He's a complex figure who defies easy categorization. He's a force for good in some ways, while also perpetuating harmful patterns in others. And it's up to each of us to grapple with those contradictions and decide how we ultimately view his legacy.
Yeah, it's a lot to unpack. It's not just about separating the art from the artist. It's about recognizing the multifaceted nature of a person, the good and the bad, the light and the shadow.
And the observer's analysis adds another layer to this discussion. They suggest that Diddy's success and controversies are in some ways a reflection of American society itself.
Hmm.
They argue that we often celebrate ambition and wealth without fully acknowledging the ethical compromises and social costs that can sometimes come along with them.
That's a really thought-provoking perspective. It makes me wonder if we as a culture need to re-examine our own values and priorities. Are we too quick to forgive those who achieve success, even if they've cut corners or hurt others along the way?
It's a question worth pondering, and it's one that Diddy's story forces us to confront. He's a mirror, reflecting back at us our own complexities and contradictions.
So how do we even begin to answer that question? How do we reconcile these different aspects of Diddy's persona, his triumphs and his transgressions?
I think it starts with recognizing that there are no easy answers. It's not about condoning bad behavior or glossing over his flaws. It's about looking at the whole picture, acknowledging the nuances, and engaging in thoughtful, critical dialogue.
And maybe it's also about recognizing that people can evolve, that they can learn from their mistakes and strive to do better.
Right. Redemption is a complex concept. But if we believe in the possibility of growth and change, then we have to allow space for individuals to demonstrate that, even if their past actions have been deeply problematic.
Okay, so we've talked about Diddy's business moves, his legal battles, his activism, his attempts at reinvention. But what about the music? At the end of the day, that's where it all began.
Absolutely. And his impact on the music industry is undeniable. He's shaped the sound of hip-hop, launched the careers of countless artists, and pushed the boundaries of creativity and innovation.
Yeah, when you think about the artists he's worked with, Biggie, Mary J. Blige, Usher, Lil' Kim, Mace, The Lox, these are some of the biggest names in music history.
And his influence extends beyond individual artists. He helped to popularize hip-hop culture globally, blending music, fashion, and entrepreneurship into this powerful cultural force.
But here's where we come back to that question of legacy. How do we reconcile Diddy's musical achievements, his undeniable contributions to the art form, with the controversies that have plagued his career?
It's a question that goes to the heart of the art versus artist debate. Can we or should we separate the creative output from the creator's personal life and actions?
It's a tough one. I mean, can we truly appreciate a song if we know that the artist behind it has committed harmful acts? Does knowing about their flaws taint our enjoyment of their art?
There's no one-size-fits-all answer. It's a personal decision. And it often depends on the specific circumstances.
Right.
Some people may be able to compartmentalize, to appreciate the art while condemning the artist's actions.
That's sure.
Others may find it impossible to separate the two.
And I think that's where the observer's perspective is so valuable. They challenge us to think critically about the systems that allow individuals like Diddy to achieve immense success, even while engaging in questionable behavior.
They argue that we need to hold both the artist and the industry accountable. We need to examine the power structures that enable exploitation and create an environment where unethical practices can thrive.
It's a call for systemic change, for a more just and equitable music industry that protects artists and prioritizes ethical behavior over profits.
And it's a reminder that our responsibility as consumers goes beyond simply enjoying the music. We have a role to play in demanding transparency, accountability, and ethical practices from the artists we support, and the industry as a whole.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the world of P. Diddy, I think we're left with more questions than answers.
And that's okay, because sometimes the most valuable insights come from wrestling with those complexities, from acknowledging the gray areas, and from continuing to ask those tough questions.
Diddy's story is a reminder that success is rarely a straight line, that power can be both a force for good and a tool for harm, and that even those who achieve greatness are often flawed and contradictory.
And perhaps the most important takeaway is that we, as listeners and consumers, have a responsibility to engage critically with the art we consume and the artists we support. We need to be aware of the complexities, the ethical dilemmas,
Yeah.
and the power dynamics at play.
Because ultimately,
Yeah.
it's through informed engagement and thoughtful dialogue that we can create a more just and equitable music industry
Yeah.
and a more just and equitable world. It's interesting, how The Observer frames Diddy's story.
Yeah. They use this phrase, the revers de la médaille, which basically translates to the other side of the coin.
Okay.
And it perfectly captures that duality we've been talking about.
Yeah, like how his incredible business savvy, you know, his talent for spotting raw talent, turning it into gold, can
Well,
also be the very thing that leads to accusations of exploitation.
exactly. The same drive that made him a music mogul, a cultural icon, can also manifest in ways that are,
Well,
less admirable.
almost Shakespearean, isn't it? The same traits that lead to triumph can also pave the path to downfall.
And that's the thing about Diddy. He embodies this constant tension between ambition, power, and the consequences of both. He's a walking case study in the complexities of success, especially in an industry as competitive and image-driven as music.
And I think that's what makes this deep dive so fascinating. It's not just about Diddy the person. It's about exploring these bigger themes of ambition, redemption, and the ethical dilemmas that come with wielding power and influence.
And it challenges us to examine our own roles as consumers. Are we complicit in these systems?
Yeah.
When we support artists who may be engaging in unethical behavior, do we have a responsibility to hold them accountable? Or is it enough to simply enjoy the music?
Those are some heavy questions. I don't think there are easy answers, but I do believe that having these conversations, shining a light on these complexities, it's crucial. It's how we start to create a more just and equitable world, both within the music industry and beyond.
I completely agree. And I think Diddy's story, as messy and contradictory as it is, can serve as a catalyst for those conversations. It forces us to confront some uncomfortable truths about the nature of success, the allure of power, and those often blurred lines between ambition and exploitation.
So where do we go from here? What are some key takeaways from this deep dive that we can carry with us?
Well, I think one important lesson is that we can't afford to be passive consumers. We need to be informed, critical thinkers who are willing to engage with the complexities and contradictions of the artists we support and the industries they operate in.
We can't just accept those glossy narratives that are often presented to us. We have to dig deeper, ask those tough questions, and demand accountability from those in positions of power.
Exactly. And we have to recognize that our choices have consequences. Who we support, what we buy, what we stream. These actions send signals to the industry about what we value and what we're willing to tolerate.
So it's not just about individual responsibility, but it's about collective action, using our voices and our choices to push for a more ethical and equitable music industry, one where artists are treated fairly, where creativity is nurtured, and where success doesn't come at the expense of others.
Right. And that starts with awareness, with education, having these uncomfortable but very necessary conversations.
Well, I think we've certainly done that today. We've explored the highs and lows, the triumphs and controversies of P. Diddy's career. And while we may not have all the answers, we've certainly gained a deeper understanding of the man, the myth, the mogul, and the complexities of the world he inhabits.
And perhaps that's the beauty of a deep dive like this. It's not about reaching some definitive conclusion. It's about sparking curiosity, challenging assumptions, and encouraging ongoing dialogue.
And with that, I think it's time to wrap up this deep dive. We've covered a lot of ground, and I hope you found it as thought-provoking as we have.
As always, we've only scratched the surface. There's so much more to explore, to discuss, to debate. But for now, we'll leave you with this. Keep questioning, keep learning, and keep engaging with the world around you.
And until next time, happy diving.